The plane had just taken off on a routine flight. Inside were 44 passengers, ordinary people with no known enemies or secrets. Yet something deadly had been hidden on board. Then soon after, a bright flash lit up the sky. A sudden explosion, a wreckage rained down over a quiet Colorado town. This was no accident. It was the deadliest bombing in US history at that time. But who could do such a thing, and why? Today we'll explore the mystery of Flight 629, exploring the dark truth behind one of the most shocking tragedies in aviation history, and also I'm pretty sure it's Flight 629, not 629. Not trying to sound like AI here. In 1955, airports were wide open, no security lines, also no metal detectors, and really, this was the golden era, so no need for a ticket to get inside or go, your family could actually go with you to the gate. Anyone could walk right up to it, parents, children, lovers, gathering freely to say goodbye or at least share one last hug. The boarding process was just as casual. Passengers stroll across the tarmac, climbing on the stairs into the aircraft, and at this point there's no jetways or, the security was just, for the most part anyways, pretty lax. And no one was checking bags for weapons or explosives because who would ever do such a terrible thing? Air travel had become increasingly popular. Safer planes and pressurized cabins made this kind of a lot better because your ears didn't explode, and also as a result of it becoming more popular, tickets would continue to get cheaper, which meant more people were flying than ever before, and accidents were rare, and it was really just seen as the safest way to go. Although your boy is personally terrified of flying, I need to get over that at some point here in the near future, but it's just something about being above the ground that high. Confidence was also so high that vending machines at the airports sold life insurance policies right next to the snack bars, just a few coins for full coverage. Most people thought it was just a formality. It was a very different time of trust and openness, a sharp contrast to the post 9/11 world that we live today, where air travel means ID checks, scanners, and extremely tight security at every turn. And into that relaxed, trusting world, the passengers of Flight 629 got ready to board. It was the evening of November 1st, 1955. Inside the busy terminal at Denver's Stapleton Airport, families hugged and friends laughed, and people just stood in line to get on the plane, ready to go home or vacation, or really whatever they wanted to go do. The aircraft was a big, shiny silver DC-6 with the name Mainliner Denver painted proudly on the side. That day, Flight 629 had already traveled from New York to Chicago, and now it had just landed in Denver. After this, it would stop in Portland, Oregon, and then finally reach Seattle, which, Seattle's a pretty good place. I do like the Pacific Northwest on hard times, I think, but people were pretty excited, as would I be. They were just mostly tired and ready to get to the next place. As soon as the plane touched down in Denver, ground crews worked quickly. Fuel was pumped into the tanks, and passengers who reached their final stop in Denver stepped off and collected their bags. New travelers climbed aboard, taking their seats and placing their luggage in the cargo hold. Even the flight crew was swapped out. A fresh set of pilots took over the cockpit for the rest of the journey. By 6:52 p.m., the Mainliner Denver lifted off of the runway. The engines roared and the plane climbed smoothly into the sky. For 11 minutes, everything felt calm, steady, and completely normal. But then at exactly 7:03 p.m., as the plane flew high above the quiet suburb of Longmont, Colorado, something horrific would take place. A flash of light would light up the sky, so bright that it could be seen for miles. People all around looked up, and then came the boom, a thunderous explosion that shook windows and rattled the ground. In the darkness above, a huge orange fireball appeared, and it was falling fast. The Mainliner Denver had exploded in mid-air, 5,800 feet above the ground. Pieces of metal would rain down over a 1.5-mile stretch of land. The main body of the plane crashed into a sugar beet field, where it exploded again as the fuel tanks caught fire. Police would be mobilized, along with firefighters, and even the National Guard troops rushed to the scene. And, as is standard, so did the media, so reporters and even some curious neighbors all arrived. But as the smoke cleared and the flames burned low, it became heartbreakingly clear. There was really no one left to survive. All 44 people on board had died in the air. Miraculously, no one on the ground had been hurt by the falling wreckage. Now, all anyone could do was begin the slow, horrific work of collecting remains, marking debris, waiting for investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board or CAB to arrive, and in general, just trying to clean up the area. So when the team finally reached the scene, they faced a fairly difficult challenge. In the 1950s, figuring out why a plane crash was far more difficult than it is today. There were no flight recorders, no black boxes to tell the story of what happened in the cockpit, and there were no computers to help them understand the data. Investigators had just one thing to work with: the wreckage. That's why the crash site was treated like a crime scene, even before anyone knew if a crime had actually even been committed. The field was huge. Pieces of the plane were scattered for over a mile and a half, and that told investigators something very important. The plane had broken apart while still in the air, and not when it hit the ground. Witnesses had said they saw a flash and heard an explosion. The widespread of wreckage confirmed all of this. So the team made a plan. Before moving any of the debris, they brought in a surveying crew. These were people who carefully measured and marked the ground. They mapped out exactly where each piece of the plane had landed, like putting together a puzzle on a giant open field. Then, piece by piece, the wreckage was taken to a large hangar at the airport where it would be rebuilt like a giant model. As they worked, one area kept standing out: cargo compartment number 4. It was in the back of the plane near the tail. That's where the explosion had started. But there was a problem. This part of the plane had no fuel tanks. There were no engines or hazardous cargo that could have caused such a powerful blast. The only thing in that compartment was passenger luggage. As investigators studied the wreckage, a dark suspicion began to grow. What if the explosion hadn't been an accident? Soon that suspicion turned into something much more serious. Experts from the FBI arrived. They carefully tested pieces of the wrecked plane. On some of the metal, they found something that changed everything: tiny traces of explosive chemicals, the kind used in dynamite. That was all the proof that they needed. Flight 629 had been bombed. Someone had planted an explosive device actually on the plane itself. All 44 people on board had been killed, not by the accident, but by an act of murder. At that time, it was the deadliest mass killing in the US history. Even more shocking, it became the first proven case of a commercial plane being brought down by a bomb in America. There had been whispers of sabotage before, like the 1933 crash of another United Airlines flight in Indiana, where 7 people had died. Some suspected that a bomb had actually been planted there, but the truth was really never confirmed. That mystery has remained unsolved, but this time, there was absolutely no doubt. The real mystery now was, though, who planted the bomb and why? The passengers of Flight 629 weren't famous. They weren't politicians, they weren't celebrities, they weren't anybody that anybody would really know apart from families and friends. They were just ordinary people, parents, workers, travelers, all heading home or to a new place. At first, suspicion fell on airline workers. At the time, United Airlines flight engineers were on strike, and the company had replaced them with other pilots who weren't working. Maybe someone was angry enough to strike back. But that theory didn't last too long. Moreover, the baggage handlers at Denver's airport didn't report anything unusual. No strangers had been near the plane, and really, they didn't see anything that they would deem suspicious or, seemed out of place. But then the baggage handlers, they kind of remembered a few things and shared an important detail that kind of helped narrow down the suspect list. Before the plane had landed in Denver, cargo hold number 4 was full of bags from earlier stops. But after landing, the handlers removed all of those bags and then put them in another compartment while they searched for a set of lost keys. Then they loaded new bags from passengers boarding at Denver into the cargo hold number 4. This meant that when the plane took off from Denver, only the bags of Denver passengers were inside that hold. The FBI started to think this wasn't just a random act of terror. Maybe the killer wasn't targeting everyone, just one person. And maybe behind it all was something even colder: a plan for profit. As the FBI dug deeper, they remembered a case from a few years earlier, one that felt chillingly similar. Back in 1949 in Canada, a plane called Flight 108 had just taken off from Montreal when it exploded in the sky, killing 23 people. At first, no one understood why, but when police investigated, they discovered something that was also equally horrific. A man named Albert Guay had planted a bomb on the plane. His target wasn't the airline or random people. He wanted to kill his own wife. What a dick. You would kill all of these people just to take out your own wife. He hoped to collect her life insurance and run away with another woman. Guay and 2 others who helped him were later arrested, found guilty, and executed, as they all should have been. Now in Denver, it was hard not to see these similarities. Could Flight 629 have been brought down for the same reason? Investigators focused closely on the passengers who boarded the plane in Denver. One name stood out: Daisy King. She was the only passenger who got on the flight at Denver's Stapleton Airport and also happened to be a local resident. Daisy was 53 years old, a widow, and a bit of a mystery herself. She wasn't like most women in 1955. She was independent, a businesswoman, and evidently she was claimed to not be afraid to speak her mind. She had traveled all over and loved the outdoors, and in general, she just kind of lived life on her own terms. On that day, Daisy was flying to Alaska to visit her daughter Helen, and it seemed like a fairly normal trip. But now, with the memory of the Canadian bombing fresh in their minds, investigators had to ask, was Daisy King the target? And if so, who would want her dead? Daisy King had been excited about her trip to Alaska. She wasn't going there just to relax. She had fairly big plans. She wanted to go out caribou hunting. That's right, that's old school. While most people were planning quiet family visits, Daisy had her sights set on the outdoors because apparently she wasn't like women her age, although I feel like women can go hunt, but she had her own way of doing things, including the rule that her children were not allowed to call her mother, they had to call her Daisy. Okay? So even with her bold personality, everyone at the FBI spoke to would say the same exact thing. Daisy was kind, Daisy was generous, and no one could think of anyone who would want to hurt her. But something just didn't add up. In crimes related to life insurance, the person responsible is often someone close, someone usually in the family. So investigators looked at Daisy's grown son, 23-year-old John Gilbert Graham, or as most people just called him, Jack. Right away they found quite a few problems. Jack Graham was no stranger to the police. Back in 1951, he had vanished from town after forging checks at the company where he worked. He even used the stolen money to buy a car. Police then chased him across states before catching him in Texas. Before that, as a teenager, Jack had joined the Coast Guard, but he lied about his age and evidently went AWOL, leaving without permission. He was then kicked out. I think usually they throw you in the brig for that, right? But it all looked like the record of a reckless young man. But maybe some thought he had grown out of it. By 1955, Jack had a wife named Gloria and 2 small children. He seemed to be settling down. He even ran a business with Daisy, a drive-in restaurant called The Crown. But when investigators looked closer, things started to crack. Even though Daisy had bought the house Jack's family had lived in, they didn't get along. In fact, people had seen them arguing loudly right in front of the customers at their restaurant. Behind the family smiles, there was a real tension. And now the FBI had to ask, could that tension have turned into something far more dangerous? As investigators looked deeper into Jack Graham's life, the pieces started to fall into place. It turned out that Jack was not just Daisy's son, he was also one of the main people set to inherit her money. Daisy had built a good-sized estate over the years, but there was something even more tempting than just that. At the airport, right before her flight, Daisy had purchased a life insurance policy from a vending machine. It was a strange idea today, or it's a really strange idea today, but back then, this was pretty common. The policy would have paid out $37,500 if she died in a plane crash. In today's money, that would be worth more than $437,000. So now the FBI had a possible motive, which would be the all-encompassing root of all evil, money. But as they kept digging, they found something that was even darker, something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Jack Graham was born during the Great Depression, when money was tight and families everywhere were struggling. His father, William Graham, died in 1937, leaving Daisy to raise her children alone. But Daisy didn't think that she could do it, so she ended up sending Jack away. He ended up in a Denver orphanage, a lonely place for a young boy. Years would pass, and in 1941, Daisy's life changed again. She married a wealthy rancher named Earl King. With money and a new house, she was finally in a better place. But she never went back for Jack. No one knows why. Maybe she thought it was for the best. Maybe she felt guilty, but Jack never forgot. Yeah, you know, if you give up your kid... Look, I get it. I break into these things. But if you give up your kid because you're struggling financially, and then you're no longer struggling financially, and then you don't go back, maybe the streak that potentially was in Jack was also in Daisy, is all I'm saying. Anyway, so he grew up feeling abandoned and unwanted, watching from afar as his mother built a new life without him. Even when they reconnected as adults, their relationship was rocky. At that point, you just walk away. Jack wanted love, he wanted a bond, but Daisy didn't seem to be able to give it. The pain from childhood never fully healed. And now, the FBI was beginning to believe that this broken mother-son relationship mixed with money and years of resentment might have ended in murder. The clue that cracked the case didn't come from an expert, though. It came from a neighbor, just an ordinary person making a passing comment. They said, it was a shame Daisy would never get to open the Christmas present her son had quietly slipped into her luggage before the flight. That one line made the FBI pause. Could the gift have actually been a bomb? Then a second detail raised even more suspicion. A baggage worker at the airport remembered something fairly alarming, but didn't do anything. Daisy King's luggage had been too heavy. The airline told her she could either unpack some of it or pay a fee. She turned to her son for advice, and Jack Graham was firm. Don't open it, he told her. Just pay the fee. Now agents turned all their attention on Jack Graham. They searched his house and found a piece of a wire, one that perfectly matched the kind used in a bomb, and it didn't stop there. A shopkeeper remembered selling Jack sticks of dynamite and blasting caps, because remember, this is crazy. This is just stuff you could buy like 75 years ago. Another had sold him a timing device, high voltage battery, and more of that same wire. When you put all that together, it was clear Jack Graham had everything needed to build a time bomb. FBI agents would then bring him in. They questioned him for 12 straight hours. Finally, Jack gave in. He signed a full confession admitting he had planted the bomb to kill only his mother. The other 43 people on the plane, men, women, and children, were of no importance to him because he's a complete psycho. They were just unintended victims caught in the blast. How did you think that was gonna go? This story would shock the nation. Across the entire country, people opened their newspapers and saw Jack Graham's face. Radio shows, newspapers, and even the young world of television at this point couldn't stop talking about the case. One man had brought down a plane, not with war or politics, but because of money, hate, and a twisted version of love. The case would draw so much attention that the Colorado Supreme Court made a rare move. They allowed TV cameras inside the courtroom, something almost never done at that time. Only twice before in U.S. history this has actually ever happened. Jack Graham's trial was about to become national news and not just a courtroom drama. But first, prosecutors had a bit of an issue. What crime do you really charge this man with? I don't know, the crime of being a complete douchebag, probably. At this point, no laws existed for really what he did. As crazy as it sounds, there was no federal law at that time against blowing up an airplane on purpose. Congress had simply never imagined such a thing, so Graham couldn't be tried in federal court. Instead, he was handed over to the state of Colorado, where local prosecutors could charge him with murder. But even here, they had to make a choice. To avoid legal complications, they charged him with just one count, the murder of his mother, Daisy King. It didn't matter whether it was one victim or 44, the punishment would be the same, death by execution. Which, yes, take that guy out. When the trial began in April of 1956, it became the most talked about event in Denver. Crowds lined up for hours outside the courthouse hoping to get a seat. It was the hottest ticket in town, apparently. Look, man, all I'm gonna say is like, it happens. This is not just intrinsic to this era. This is intrinsic to our era. Like, if something happens, people make a meme out of your death. I think it's just the way it has to be. Like, people love spectacle, and death is spectacle. I just hope, like, I never die in some weird way. God, this is really morbid, because if it ever happens, people are going to point to this exact comment and be like, little did he know. But I hope I'll just like die in my sleep or something, like at 86, when everybody forgets about all of these channels. Anyways, moving on. So no one was allowed in without obviously being searched, but police were worried someone might try to take justice into their own hands and shoot Jack Graham in court. Finding a fair jury was nearly impossible. More than 200 people were dismissed. Why? Because most of them had already believed that Graham was guilty. This wasn't just a trial, it was a nationwide spectacle, something America had never seen before. And unfortunately for us, with the 24-hour news cycle, we would see it all the time now. In the packed courtroom, prosecutor Burt Keating took his time. He moved slowly, carefully, laying out his case piece by piece. The jury listened to forensic experts, FBI agents, mechanics, and officials from the United Airlines. 78 witnesses in total, 174 exhibits. There were shards of wreckage, a scale model of a DC-6, and even 2 live sticks of dynamite. The witness handling them promised the courtroom, these are real, and yes, they are dangerous. Graham's court-appointed lawyers didn't have much to work with. Their client's own signed confession was now in the hands of the jury. He had admitted to planting the bomb. He claimed later the confession had been forced, but the judge let it in anyways. Like, you don't just... This is what's difficult. Okay, so this is something to know. This guy, let's be real here, kind of a total tool, right? But the big thing is that cops, they're allowed to lie to you in these types of situations. So whenever you go to like an intelligence gathering room, as they might call it, to be questioned by the cops, the biggest thing you need to say is, I want my lawyer. And I'm not saying anything without my lawyer. And it's not so much because you're trying to hide something. That is your right as an American to do this. But it's mostly because your words can get twisted and they will attempt to make you confused as to what you say and what you would do. So if you, like, let's say you said you went to the BP gas station instead of the Kangaroo gas station. 3 hours into it, they might be like, okay, so when you went to the Kangaroo gas station, if you don't catch that mistake, that's essentially your story changing. So that's why it's better just, even if you didn't do anything, right? And you're 100% safe and you know that you're right, you need a lawyer. You always need a lawyer when you talk to the cops. And that's all you need to do, like just across the board. And then that will be the end of the interrogation, I guess is the best way to call it. And then you will probably go sit in a jail cell for a while until a lawyer can either be appointed or yours is able to come talk for you. But apart from that, that's what you need to do. Anyhow, so the defense couldn't argue that Graham was insane. A team of doctors had already examined him, and their verdict was he knew exactly what he was doing. So when the jury stepped out to decide, no one expected it to really take that long, and they were absolutely right. In less than an hour, they returned with their decision. Jack Graham would be executed in the gas chamber at Colorado State Penitentiary. I believe it's Canyon City, just 150 miles away from where Flight 629 had fallen from the sky. But there would end up being one more twist. Graham refused to appeal his conviction. In a death penalty case, that was unheard of. Most prisoners bought time, months, even years. Graham didn't. He just waited and evidently wanted it to end. He even tried to take his own life in jail during the trial. Guards found him in time and they intervened and revived him, and in the end, he got what he wanted. On January 11th, 1957, just 12 days before his 25th birthday, John Gilbert Graham was put to death. Only 14 months had passed since the bombing of Flight 629. And then the story faded. Slowly, quietly, the United States would move on. But the impact of that case didn't vanish. It changed the U.S. law forever. Congress would go on to take action. They passed the Public Law 84 through 79, making it a federal crime to sabotage or destroy an aircraft with a death penalty if anyone was killed. It was a major step forward, but surprisingly, airport security didn't change overnight. Metal detectors and baggage screening, not really required in the US until 1972. And for years, the airline industry resisted new safety measures. They said these changes were too expensive and that they would frighten passengers. But the truth was much darker. In the years after Flight 629, 3 more American airplanes were bombed. Each time the person responsible was a passenger who bought flight insurance from a vending machine, hoping the payout would help their family. 80 people died in those attacks, and eventually the machines were banned in Colorado, and by the 1960s, they were phased out across the country, replaced by credit card, insurance policies, and growing pressure from pilots and safety advocates. Today, air travel looks nothing like it did in 1955. Jets soar higher and faster, smoking is gone, and the outdated rules once forced on flight attendants about weight, marriage, and apparently motherhood are mostly history. But smooth skies don't always mean smooth systems. Headlines still tell stories of cover-ups and failures. Boeing whistleblowers silenced very clearly because they just happen to take themselves out in some weird way after they say something. United Airlines under scrutiny, and the pressure to appear safe can sometimes outweigh the need to be safe. Yet somehow, flying remains the safest way to travel, a strange truth built on tragedy, reform, and relentless vigilance. The story of Flight 629 is more than a distant disaster. It was essentially a turning point for the country. One act of cruelty from one man, Jack Gilbert Graham, shook the skies and reshaped the rules. Not out of progress, but out of necessity. Because sometimes it takes something unthinkable to finally make people think. Imagine that. So I always like to break in at the end here, and obviously I like to break in during the actual story that I'm telling. So flying in general, yes, it is the safest form of travel. This is absolutely wild that during this era you could just straight up get dynamite, and on top of that there was no security screenings. Obviously in today's day and age things are much different with the screenings. Things are different with the turbulence, there's less crashes, all that, but there is something going on with Boeing and the planes that are being designed that are having issues. Although something that this kind of reminds me of is that flight that just actually went down in India, which is absolutely horrific. Apparently the last thing I saw on that was the fuel mixture, or like the knobs were pushed all the way in when they were supposed to be all the way out. So the fuel was actually cut off. So when the actual pilot questioned the co-pilot about it, it does seem like the co-pilot was attempting to crash the plane on purpose because the pilot was able to get the fuel going again for the engines, but apparently it was too late at that point and they couldn't get enough thrust to actually start the plane properly and get it out of the way of some buildings. So that is very tragic, but it just shows this crap is still happening. I know, like I said, that flying is the safest form of travel. But I always like to think of it this way also, right? How many cars are on the road? And how many wrecks can possibly happen because those many cars are on the road, right? It's going to vastly outnumber planes. And it's sort of like people saying, oh, well, cows are more, or was it? Cows are more dangerous than bears. It's like, okay, well, think about how many cows there are around humans, and then think about if we had the same amount of bears around humans. Would the attack metrics be the exact same? No. So it's like if we only had as many cars on the road as we have planes, would the crash metrics be the same? Probably not. So I really do wonder how safe it actually is percentage-wise. If somebody can drop that in the comments, that would be amazing, because I have to get over my fear of flying because I am being a giant loser about that. But God help me, something about takeoff is terrible. Anyways, this is just me sort of talking to you guys as opposed to, I don't know, doing normal stuff, because this guy's definitely sucked, and he was 100%. Let me readjust my chair so you can hear that. He was 100% guilty. And again, just to round that off, always have a lawyer in the interrogation room. Don't go in there and think you're gonna somehow outsmart the cops, because the cops are trained for it. And even if you can outsmart the cops, it's just better to have a lawyer. You're just gonna sit there and raise your cortisol levels and be in an argument with the police over this. It's just get a lawyer. So anyways, that's going to do it for me. I hope everybody enjoyed. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like, as that helps get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date. We're on the latter half of 250,000, approaching 300,000 at some point. So I do appreciate all your support. It has been amazing. And I want to thank my patrons' support real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Invictus Echo, Monkey Man, and Scrungle. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. And at the Secondhand Accounts tier, we have Bianca, Fred Rush, Stutz, and Troy. And then to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. But all right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.